Grace knelt on the cold floor, crying, her old school bag lying beside her like an unwanted burden. Her stepmother, Mrs. Benson, stood before her with folded arms. Lucy, her daughter, stood beside her, dressed in clean clothes and smiling proudly. "Please, Mama, don't sell me," Grace begged in a trembling voice. "I'll do anything you want. I'll serve Lucy forever. I won't talk about school again." Mrs. Benson's eyes were cold. "You're talking nonsense. Lucy has gained admission. We need money, and you are the only thing we can sell. What use are you in this house?" Grace cried harder. "Please, Ma, don't do this." "Then go and wake your mother from the grave if you want to go to school," the woman shouted. "Your mother was as useless as you." At that moment, there was a knock. Lucy ran to open the door. A man in ragged clothes entered quietly, holding an old bag. Lucy smiled. "Mother, the buyer is here." Grace's heart dropped. The man looked around the room without speaking. Mrs. Benson handed him a small paper bag and whispered something to him. He nodded and brought out a bundle of cash. Grace stared as her stepmother counted it, smiling. "Take her and go," Mrs. Benson said coldly. "She's your problem now." Grace cried louder. "Mama, please, don't let him take me." But Mrs. Benson pushed her roughly. "Get out of my house. You've eaten my food long enough." The man stood silently, watching everything. He turned to Grace. "Come with me," he said softly. Grace hesitated, but the woman raised a broom. "If you don't go with him, I'll beat you to death." Grace wiped her tears and followed the man out. As they walked down the dusty road, she looked back one last time, hoping her stepmother would call her back. But Mrs. Benson had already gone inside. They boarded a bus. Grace sat by the window, crying quietly as the village disappeared behind her. The man said nothing. He only stared ahead. After a long silence, Grace whispered, "Sir, where are you taking me?" "To a safe place," he replied gently. "You'll be fine." When they reached the last stop, he paid the driver and stopped a bike. Grace sat behind him, holding her tears. She didn't know what awaited her. But when the bike stopped, she gasped. A tall gate stood before a huge mansion. The compound was clean and quiet. She looked at the man in shock. "This is my house," he said. "Come in." Inside, he gave her food and told her to sit. "I didn't buy you to hurt you," he said calmly. "I only wanted someone to help me around the house. You can stay here safely." Grace looked at him, confused but relieved. "Thank you, sir." He nodded. "My name is Mr. Morgan. You can call me father if you want." For the first time in years, someone spoke to her with kindness. Grace ate quietly, tears still in her eyes, not from fear anymore, but from disbelief that a stranger could treat her better than her own family. After Grace left that day, Mrs. Benson felt no regret. She sat in the compound counting the money again, smiling widely. It was the most cash she had held in months. Lucy came out, dressed in her fine new gown. "Mama, did he pay all the money?" Lucy asked excitedly. Mrs. Benson nodded. "He did, my daughter. Now you can go to school. We don't need that useless girl again." Lucy grinned. "I told you, Mama, that Grace was nothing but bad luck." Mrs. Benson laughed. "You are the star of this family. Everything I do is for you." Within days, she used part of the money to buy provisions, new clothes, and shoes for Lucy. She paid the school fees and bragged all around the neighborhood. People who saw her at the market heard the same story every time. "My daughter has gained admission," she would say proudly. "She's going to university in the city." Women clapped for her, some out of jealousy, others out of disbelief. One asked, "But what of that quiet girl, Grace? We don't see her again." Mrs. Benson's face changed instantly. That one?" She ran away. "I tried to help her, but she was stubborn like her mother. I don't even know where she went. Maybe she's on the street somewhere." She said it so confidently that everyone believed her. Lucy later traveled to the city for school. Mrs. Benson escorted her to the motor park, carrying her box proudly on her head. People around watched and congratulated her. "Your daughter will make you proud," they said. "I know," Mrs. Benson replied. Not everyone was born for greatness, but Lucy was. When Lucy reached the university, she quickly made friends. She didn't tell anyone she was from a poor background. She told her roommates that her father was a businessman who died abroad. Her mother sent her small money every month, but Lucy wanted more. She started going out with rich boys who bought her things. Back home, Mrs. Benson's life began to look easier. Without Grace in the house, she had no one to shout at, no one to send on errands, and no one to remind her of her own wickedness. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of Grace's voice begging her kept echoing in her mind. "Please, Ma, don't sell me." She would turn on her bed and hiss. "Nonsense," she would say aloud. She deserved it. Still, a small fear grew inside her. Each time she saw a strange face in the village, she thought maybe someone had come to ask about Grace. But when months passed and nobody did, she relaxed. Her neighbors noticed her pride. "Mrs. Benson, you don't talk about your stepdaughter again," one of them said one day. Mrs. Benson smiled proudly. "There's nothing to talk about. Some children are born to suffer. My Lucy is the one God blessed." Meanwhile, Lucy's letters from school were full of lies. She told her mother she was doing well, that she had joined a rich club, and that soon a big man would help her. Mrs. Benson read those letters and danced. "My enemies thought I would suffer forever, but look at me now." She didn't know that far away in the city, the girl she sold like a goat was now living in comfort and peace, being treated with more love than she had ever given her own child. Grace woke up early the next morning to the sound of birds singing outside her window. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was soft, the room clean and painted in bright colors. She sat up slowly and remembered everything: her stepmother, the sale, the strange man, and this big house. A soft knock came on the door. It was Mr. Morgan. "Good morning, my daughter," he said kindly. "Did you sleep well?" Grace nodded shyly. "Yes, sir." "Good," he replied. "You'll help me with breakfast." "Don't worry, I'll show you where things are kept." Grace followed him quietly to the kitchen. He showed her where the pots, plates, and food items were arranged neatly on the shelves. "You don't have to fear me," he said gently. "I'm not a bad man. I only wanted someone who can help me and also have a place to stay." That was the first morning Grace smiled since she left the village. Over the next few days, she became more relaxed. She cleaned the house, watered the flowers, and cooked simple meals. The mansion was peaceful. Mr. Morgan treated her kindly, never raising his voice. He told her stories about his late wife and about how lonely the house had become. "You remind me of my daughter," he said one evening. "She died many years ago. Maybe God sent you to fill that empty space." Grace lowered her head, touched by his words. For the first time, someone saw her as family, not a burden. One afternoon, as she was sweeping the living room, she heard the gate open. A car entered and stopped in front of the house. A young man stepped out, tall, neat, and confident. Grace quickly moved aside. "Father," the young man said as he entered the sitting room. "You didn't tell me you hired someone new." Mr. Morgan came out smiling. "Mike, my son, welcome home. You've been away for months." Mike hugged his father, then turned and looked at Grace. "And who's this?" "This is Grace," his father replied. "She helps me around the house." Mike's eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than expected. "You didn't tell me your new cook is this beautiful," he teased. Grace looked down quickly, embarrassed. Mr. Morgan laughed. "Don't start your jokes already. She's like a daughter here." They all laughed, and Grace returned to her room later that evening feeling a strange warmth in her heart. It had been a long time since she heard laughter that wasn't directed at her in mockery. That night, Mr. Morgan called Mike to his room. "You'll be staying for a while, right?" he asked. "Yes, Dad," Mike said. "The company gave me some weeks off. I'll rest here." "Good. You'll get to know Grace better. She's a quiet girl, very hardworking." Mike nodded, though his mind was already on the girl he had just met. There was something about her eyes, deep sadness, mixed with quiet strength. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, as Grace cooked in the kitchen, she felt someone watching her. She turned and saw Mike standing by the door. "Sir, do you need anything?" she asked politely. He smiled. "No, I just wanted to see what smells so nice." Grace smiled faintly and continued cooking. Mike leaned against the wall. "Have you finished secondary school?" he asked suddenly. Grace nodded. "Yes, sir." "What about university?" She paused, the spoon trembling slightly in her hand. "I wanted to go, but my stepmother sold me." Mike frowned. "Sold you? What do you mean?" "She sold me to your father," Grace said softly. "She needed money to send her own daughter to school." Mike's face changed. He stood upright, shocked. "She sold you like an animal? How could someone be that heartless?" Grace looked down. "That's the life I came from, sir." Mike left the kitchen, his heart burning with anger and pity. He went straight to his father's room. "Dad," he said sharply, "the girl you brought here said her stepmother sold her to you. Is that true?" Mr. Morgan looked calm. "Sit down, Mike. Let me explain." When Mike sat, his father said, "I went to a village one day and heard a woman saying she wanted to sell her stepdaughter. She didn't care if the buyer killed the girl. I couldn't sleep after hearing that. The next day, I went there pretending to be a poor man looking for a wife. I paid her only to take the girl away from that evil house. I didn't buy her, I rescued her." Mike sat quietly, nodding slowly. "You did the right thing, Dad. God used you to save her." That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Grace, the girl his father saved from cruelty and sold dreams. Something inside him told him her story wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Grace was in the garden watering flowers when she heard slow footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Mike standing a few steps away, his hands in his pockets. The sun had barely risen, and the early light touched his face softly. "You haven't asked for my name," he said with a smile. Grace bowed slightly. "Sir, there's no need. Your father already told me." "There's every need," Mike replied gently. "My name is Mike Morgan, and I'd like to be your friend." Grace froze for a moment. No one had ever said such a thing to her, not since her father died. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." Mike took the watering can from her hand. "Let me help." "No, sir," she said quickly. "That's my work." Mike chuckled. "You talk like an old woman." "I'm only helping." Grace tried not to smile, but she did. Something about his voice made her feel calm. For the first time in years, she laughed, a soft laugh that came from deep inside her heart. Days passed, and Mike made it a habit to talk with her. Sometimes in the morning while she cooked, other times in the evening when the compound was quiet. Grace tried to keep her distance, but his kindness slowly melted her fear. One afternoon, while she arranged clothes in the sitting room, Mike came in holding 2 cups of juice. "Take," he said, handing one to her. "I don't like drinking alone." Grace hesitated. "Sir, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "You've been working all morning. Sit down." She sat slowly, her eyes lowered. Mike smiled. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Yes, sir." "Do you still want to go to school?" The question caught her off guard. Her throat tightened. I don't know," she said weakly. "That dream died the day my stepmother sold me." Mike looked at her quietly for a while. "Dreams don't die, Grace. People kill them, but God has a way of bringing them back. Do you want to study again?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "More than anything, sir. But it's too late." "No, it's not," Mike said firmly. "From today, consider that dream alive again. I'll send you to school." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "You mean it?" He nodded. "Yes, you'll go back to school. You deserve a future." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but the words refused to come. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "Nobody has ever cared like this." Mike smiled softly. "Then let me be the first." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window in her room, watching the moon. Her heart was full. She remembered her late father's voice, "Grace, you'll make me proud one day." Maybe that day was finally near. She prayed quietly for the young man who had become her light in the darkness. In his room, Mike was also awake. He couldn't stop thinking about her, not as a servant, but as a wounded soul trying to rise. There was a calmness in her eyes that drew him closer. She carried pain like a shadow, yet she smiled through it. He admired that. The next morning, Grace went to the market to buy food items. Mike offered to drive her. "You'll get lost if you go alone," he said lightly. On the way, they talked freely for the first time. Grace told him about her father's death, about how life changed when her stepmother took over, and how Lucy was treated like gold while she was treated like a burden. Mike listened without interrupting. When she finished, his voice was low but steady. "Your stepmother will answer to God one day. People like her always do." Grace sighed. "Maybe. I just don't want to hate her anymore." Mike looked at her with quiet admiration. "That's what makes you different." When they got back home, Mr. Morgan saw the way they talked and smiled to himself. The girl he rescued was no longer a frightened child. She was beginning to bloom, and his son was part of that change. Weeks passed. Mike started teaching her at home while preparing to enroll her in school. He brought her books, a small laptop, and notebooks. Grace read every night, sitting by the lamp like a child discovering life again. One evening, as they studied together, she looked up and said softly, "You changed my life." Mike smiled. Maybe it was meant to be. There was silence between them, the kind that spoke louder than words. Grace's eyes met his for a brief moment before she looked away, her heart beating fast. Something she couldn't name was growing quietly inside her, something warm, something beautiful. It had been months since Grace started school again. Mike kept his promise. He enrolled her in one of the best private schools in the city. Every morning, he drove her himself, and every evening, they sat together talking about her classes, her dreams, and her past. Grace worked hard. Her teachers loved her. She was quiet but brilliant. Whenever she returned home, she helped Mr. Morgan with little things around the house. The old man treated her like his own daughter. Sometimes he would say, "Grace, your presence healed this home. You brought joy to an old man's heart." One evening, after dinner, Mike and Grace sat in the garden. The air was calm, the moon full, and the sound of crickets filled the silence between them. Grace was talking about how her exams went when she noticed that Mike wasn't listening. He was just staring at her, not in a playful way, but with the kind of look that made her heart tremble. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked softly, smiling shyly. Mike smiled back, but didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath and said, "Grace, you've changed my life." Grace looked surprised. "Me? How?" "You brought peace," he said quietly. "Before you came, this house was empty. I thought happiness was gone forever after my mother died. But since you came, everything feels alive again. Even my father smiles more." Grace's eyes grew wet. "You and your father saved me, sir. If not for both of you, I don't know where I would be." Mike shook his head gently. "Don't call me sir again. My name is Mike." Grace smiled faintly. "Okay, Mike." He stood up slowly and walked a few steps away, then turned back to face her. "Grace," he said softly, "I've been meaning to say this for a long time." Her heart began to beat fast. "What is it?" He took her hands in his eyes fixed on hers. "I love you, Grace." Grace froze. She stared at him as if she didn't hear right. "You love me?" "Yes," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I love you with everything in me. You're not just a girl I helped. You've become part of my world. You're my peace." Tears rolled down her cheeks. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "I love you too." Mike smiled through his own tears. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring. He knelt on one knee and said, "Grace, will you marry me?" Grace covered her mouth in shock. "Mike," she whispered, trembling. Yes, I will." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she broke down crying, her heart full of gratitude. "I never thought anyone would ever love me this way," she said softly. Mike stood up and pulled her into a gentle hug. "You deserve all the love in the world," he said. "You've suffered enough. From now on, you'll only know peace." That night, they went to Mr. Morgan's room and told him everything. The old man looked at them for a moment, then smiled warmly. "You have my blessing," he said. "Grace, I prayed for my son to find a woman with a good heart. God brought you." Grace knelt before him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving me." Mr. Morgan lifted her up gently. "From today, call me father. You're no longer anyone's servant. You're my daughter." Mike held her hand tightly as they left the room. For Grace, it felt like a dream she never wanted to wake from. The same girl who was once sold like a goat now had a ring on her finger, loved, accepted, and seen as worthy. Morning came bright and calm. Grace woke up before sunrise and sat by her window, staring at the small silver ring on her finger. She touched it gently, tears filling her eyes again. It wasn't about gold or diamonds, it was about love. Real love. Something she never thought she would ever have. Mr. Morgan called her from the living room. "Grace, my daughter," he said as she came down, "sit down." She obeyed quietly, wondering what was going on. Mike sat beside his father, smiling. "Do you know why we called you?" the old man asked. Grace shook her head. Mr. Morgan smiled warmly. "Because your life is about to change again." Mike reached into his bag and brought out a white envelope. He placed it gently on her lap. "Open it." Grace opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a brand new international passport. She looked up at him in shock. "Mike, what is this?" "It's yours," he said softly. "You're going to study abroad." Grace froze. "Study abroad?" Mike nodded. "You once told me you wanted to be a lawyer. Now you will be. I've already spoken with a university overseas. You'll start your law program there next month." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "You've done too much for me already. I don't deserve all this." Mike smiled. "You deserve more than you know. You've been through pain, but now it's time to rise." Mr. Morgan nodded proudly. "My daughter, I told you God brought you here for a reason. I'm happy to see this day." Grace knelt and held their hands. "You both became my family when I had none. I'll never forget this." The following weeks moved fast. Preparations began. Grace went for her passport interview, medical checks, and school registration. Mike made sure everything was perfect. Sometimes Grace would stop in the middle of the day and just look around the house, remembering how far she had come from sleeping on the cold floor in her stepmother's house to preparing for life abroad. One afternoon, as she packed her clothes, Mike entered the room quietly. "Are you ready?" he asked. She turned and smiled. "Almost." He leaned by the door, watching her. "You look happy." Grace nodded. "I am. But I'll miss this house. I'll miss you and Father." Mike walked closer and held her hands. "I'll visit you often. You're not leaving my heart." She smiled shyly, her eyes misty. "You talk like an old man." He laughed. "I'm serious. I want you to go, learn, and come back as the best lawyer in the country." Grace nodded slowly. "I'll make you proud, Mike." "I promise." The day of her departure finally came. Mr. Morgan stood outside the house, holding her hands, tears in his eyes. "Grace," he said softly, "you came into this house with pain, but you're leaving with hope. Don't ever forget where you came from. And never forget that you are loved." Grace hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Father." Mike helped her with her suitcase. At the airport, they sat quietly for a few minutes, not wanting the moment to end. "When I return," Grace said, smiling through tears, "I'll wear the lawyer's robe. And you'll be the first person I'll run to." Mike looked at her deeply. "I'll be waiting." When her flight was called, he pulled her close. "Go and make your dreams come true." Grace walked toward the gate, turning back one last time. Their eyes met, and that single look said everything: love, gratitude, and destiny. Years later, Grace returned, no longer the frightened girl from the village, but a confident woman with degrees and medals. She was now one of the best young lawyers in the country. Newspapers wrote about her success, and law firms sought her out. When she walked into the Morgan mansion again, Mike was waiting at the door. She dropped her bag and ran into his arms. "I told you I'd come back," she said, smiling. "And I told you I'd be waiting," he whispered. Mr. Morgan, standing by the doorway, wiped his tears. "My daughter, welcome home." Grace smiled, her heart full. Everything she lost had returned, in a new form, brighter and better than she ever imagined. Lucy had graduated from the university with pride in her heart and arrogance in her steps. Her mother, Mrs. Benson, could not hide her joy. She walked around the village like a queen, telling everyone who cared to listen that her daughter now worked in one of the biggest companies in the city. "Didn't I tell you?" she would boast in the market. "My Lucy is an accountant in a top firm. God has finally remembered us." People congratulated her, some out of surprise, others out of envy. No one dared mention Grace again, not when Mrs. Benson and her daughter were living well. The house that once echoed with fights and hunger now had new furniture, and Mrs. Benson even hired someone to help her with chores. Life was finally sweet, or so they thought. One bright Monday morning, Lucy arrived at work earlier than usual. She wore her best suit and heels, her hair perfectly done. The manager called her into his office. "Lucy," he said, "you'll go to the bank today. The company needs this money deposited immediately. The driver will go with you." Lucy nodded proudly. "Yes, sir." He handed her a brown envelope and said, "Be careful. This is a huge amount. Almost 1 billion naira. Go straight to the bank and come straight back." Lucy smiled confidently. "Don't worry, sir. Everything will be fine." She left the office feeling important. Everyone in the accounting department watched her pass. It wasn't every day someone was trusted with that kind of responsibility. She called her mother on the way. "Mama, the company sent me to the bank to deposit a big amount today," she said, excitement in her voice. Mrs. Benson's voice was full of pride. My daughter, you are really blessed. God is lifting you higher every day. Be careful and come back safely." "I will, Mama," Lucy replied. The driver met her outside with the company car. He was an older man, quiet and respectful. They placed the money safely in a bag and drove off. The city was busy, cars honking everywhere, traders shouting by the roadside. Lucy leaned back in her seat, smiling to herself. Life was finally good. But just before they reached the bank, it happened. 2 black jeeps blocked the road suddenly. 4 armed men jumped out with guns. "Stop the car," one of them shouted. The driver panicked. Before he could even react, one robber smashed the window with his gun. "Give us the bag," he yelled. Lucy screamed and held the bag tightly. "Please don't shoot. Take anything but don't hurt us." They snatched the bag and pushed her aside. Within seconds, they jumped back into their jeeps and drove off. The road went silent again, the sound of tires fading into the distance. Lucy sat on the ground, shaking all over. "Oh my God, the money, it's gone." The driver tried to comfort her. "Let's go back to the office quickly." When they returned, Lucy rushed into the manager's office, crying. "Sir, armed robbers attacked us. They took all the money." The manager stood up in shock. "What did you say?" "They blocked the road, sir. They took everything. I swear I didn't plan it. I didn't even know what to do." The manager's face hardened. "Lucy, do you have any proof? Did anyone see you being attacked?" Lucy shook her head helplessly. "No, sir. It happened too fast." The manager pressed the intercom. "Call the police." Within an hour, 2 police officers entered the building. They questioned Lucy and the driver, then asked them to follow them to the station. At first, Lucy thought it was just for a report. But when they reached the station, one officer said coldly, "Miss Lucy Benson, you are under arrest for the disappearance of company funds." "What?" she shouted. "No, I was robbed. I didn't steal anything." "Save your story for court," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. The moment the cold metal locked around her wrists, Lucy burst into tears. "Please, I'm innocent. I swear I'm innocent." The driver tried to explain, but the police ignored him. That evening, Mrs. Benson received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, her heart nearly stopped. "Mama, it's me, Lucy. They arrested me. They said I stole company money." Mrs. Benson screamed. "Jesus Christ. What are you saying?" "Mama, please, come to the police station," Lucy cried. "They said the money was almost 1 billion. I don't know what to do." Mrs. Benson dropped the phone and ran out barefoot, shouting for help. "They've arrested my daughter. My Lucy is in trouble." The same villagers who once clapped for her now gathered around, whispering in pity. "God has a way of humbling people," one old woman said quietly. Mrs. Benson didn't care. She ran straight to the motor park that night, tears falling uncontrollably. Her world, the pride she had built for years, was crashing right before her eyes. 6 months had passed, yet the sound of Lucy's voice behind the prison bars still echoed in Mrs. Benson's heart. Every night she woke up crying, calling her daughter's name. Every morning, she went to bed without food, her strength fading away with each passing day. She had done everything she could think of. She sold her lands, her gold earrings, even the little house her husband left behind. She borrowed money from people she once looked down on, those same villagers she used to boast before. Some gave her out of pity, others mocked her quietly. "Is this not the same woman who sold her stepdaughter?" one woman whispered at the market. Now look at her, crying like a baby. Mrs. Benson didn't care. Pride was gone. All she wanted was her daughter's freedom. She had gone from one lawyer's office to another, pleading, crying, begging for help. Each time she returned home, her eyes were swollen from tears and her heart heavier than before. None of the lawyers brought good news. "I'm sorry, madam," one had told her, shaking his head. "The evidence is too strong. Your daughter might spend the rest of her life in prison unless that money is recovered." Mrs. Benson had dropped to her knees that day, holding the man's legs, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please help me. She's innocent. My daughter can't steal. She was raised well. She's all I have." But the lawyer only pulled her up gently. "The manager insists it was an inside job. The driver said the robbers didn't hurt anyone. They just took the money and left. It looks suspicious." That night, Mrs. Benson cried until she lost her voice. She remembered the day she had sold Grace, how the girl had begged for mercy. The same way Lucy now begged behind prison bars. "Please, Mama, don't let them leave me here," Lucy had cried through the iron gate during her last visit. Mrs. Benson had pressed her hands against the cold bars, tears pouring freely. "My daughter, I'm trying. I've sold everything. I've done all I can. God will help us." But months went by and nothing changed. Lucy's case dragged on. The manager refused to drop the charges, saying the company's reputation was at stake. "If you can't pay back the money," he told her, "your daughter will face life imprisonment. The court date is next month." Mrs. Benson left his office that day and wandered the streets like a madwoman. Her wrapper was falling off, her hair uncombed, but she didn't care. She went from one church to another, kneeling at the altar, crying and praying. "God, please save my daughter. I have no one else. I've done wrong in my life, I've sinned, but please have mercy. Don't let her die in that place." Her tears soaked the church floor. The pastor tried to comfort her, but nothing could calm her pain. When she returned home, the house was empty. The chairs she once bought with pride were gone, sold to pay another lawyer. The walls were bare, the roof leaking. Mrs. Benson sat on the cold floor, her hands on her head. "God," she whispered weakly, "I used to think I was wise. I thought I could control life. I used to mock others and boast about my daughter. But now, I have nothing. My enemies laugh at me. My friends have abandoned me. Please, God, don't let my daughter rot in that prison." She wept until she had no tears left. Her voice broke. The house was silent except for her sobs. Outside, rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, washing away the dust on the empty compound. She sat there still, rocking herself gently, whispering the same prayer over and over. "God, please send me help. Please, just once more, have mercy." But somewhere far away in the city, in a tall building filled with busy offices, an answer to that prayer was already forming. A young woman in a fine suit was about to receive a new case file, one that would change everything for everyone involved. Her name was Grace Morgan. Mrs. Benson sat in her empty house, her eyes swollen from days of crying. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She was weak, hopeless, and alone. The world had turned its back on her. Every lawyer she'd met had failed her. The last one even told her bluntly, "Madam, just prepare yourself. Your daughter will be sentenced soon." She was still sitting on the floor when her friend Ngozi entered quietly. "My sister," Ngozi said, "why are you killing yourself with tears? There's a new lawyer in town, a young woman. They say she wins every case she touches. If anyone can bring Lucy out, it's her. Mrs. Benson looked up slowly, her eyes dull. Another lawyer? Gozi, I have nothing left. I've sold everything. What will I use to pay her? Just meet her first, Gozi said softly. Maybe she'll help you out of pity. Mrs. Benson sighed deeply. All right, let's go tomorrow. The next morning, they boarded a bus to the city. Mrs. Benson didn't speak a word the entire trip. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small nylon bag that held Lucy's documents. When they got to the law firm, the secretary led them into an office. The name on the glass door read, Grace Morgan and Associates. Grace looked up from her desk when they entered. The pen in her hand froze. Her breath caught. There she was, the woman who had once called her useless, who had sold her like an object. The world went silent for a moment. Grace's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her heart pounded, memories rushing back, her begging on the floor, her stepmother's harsh laughter, Lucy's mocking smile. Mrs. Benson didn't recognize her. Time had changed Grace completely. She was now elegant, confident, and powerful. Good morning, Ma, Mrs. Benson said weakly. Please, I need your help. Grace looked at her coldly but forced a polite smile. Please sit down. Gozi helped Mrs. Benson into the chair. The older woman began to talk immediately, tears flowing freely. She told Grace everything, from the robbery to the arrest, to the failed lawyers and her sleepless nights. When she finished, she said, They want to lock my daughter forever. Please, my lawyer. You're my last hope. Grace's eyes filled with silent anger. Her voice was calm but sharp. Madam, I think your daughter planned it. You and your daughter sound like people who do evil without remorse. Maybe this is what you both deserve. Mrs. Benson stared at her in shock. What did you say? How could you speak to me like that? Do you even know me or my daughter? Grace suddenly realized she had spoken her thoughts aloud. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked down at her papers, pretending to write something. I'm sorry, she said quietly. My mind was somewhere else. But I don't think I can help you. You should find another lawyer. Mrs. Benson grabbed the edge of the table, crying harder. Please don't say that. My daughter will die in that place. I've been told only you can help. Please, I beg you in God's name. Grace stood up abruptly, her voice rising. I said I can't help you. The room went silent. Gozi looked frightened. Mrs. Benson burst into louder sobs. Grace turned away, her chest tightening. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, then forced her tone to soften. Drop your contact number with my secretary, she said. I'll reach out if I change my mind. But don't hope too much. Look for someone else. Mrs. Benson tried to say something, but Grace was already walking toward the window, her back to them. Gozi pulled her friend up gently. Let's go, she whispered. As they left the office, Grace stood still, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her whole body trembled. For years she had dreamed of this moment, seeing her stepmother beg. Yet now that it had come, the victory didn't feel sweet. It only hurt. The journey back home was quiet. The bus rumbled along the dusty road, but neither Gozi nor Mrs. Benson spoke. The silence was heavy, thick with disappointment and regret. When they finally entered the compound, Mrs. Benson dropped her bag on the floor and sat weakly on the wooden chair in front of her small house. Her eyes were empty, her spirit broken. Gozi sighed deeply and said, My sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken you there. Mrs. Benson looked up slowly. Why are you saying that? The woman. Gozi hesitated, looking troubled. That lawyer, the way she looked at you, the way she spoke, it was as if she knew you before. Her eyes were full of something. I can't explain it, but it wasn't ordinary. Mrs. Benson frowned, confused. Know me? From where? I've never seen her before in my life. Gozi shook her head. Maybe you've forgotten, but there's something there. She looked angry, like someone fighting to hide pain. Mrs. Benson sighed. Gozi, I don't know her. And I don't care. I just need my daughter back. Please, stop thinking too much. Gozi looked at her sadly. God will help you, she said softly. Don't lose hope. Maybe that lawyer will change her mind. Mrs. Benson forced a weak smile, but deep down she felt defeated. She had been humiliated again. The young lawyer's harsh words replayed in her mind. You and your daughter are evil. You should pay for everything you did. Why would a stranger speak like that? What did she mean by everything you did? But she was too tired to think. She just wiped her tears and whispered, God, if you're still there, please don't forget me. That same night in the city, Grace sat on her bed, staring at the wall. Sleep refused to come. She had been turning on her pillow for hours, her mind in chaos. The face of her stepmother kept appearing in her thoughts, the same woman who once stood proudly while she cried on the floor begging not to be sold. The same woman who called her useless and heartless. Now, that same woman had sat before her, broken, begging for help. Grace pressed her palms against her face. Her chest felt heavy. One part of her heart whispered, let them suffer. They deserve it. This is justice. But another voice, quiet and painful, whispered back, if you let her daughter die, then you are no different from them. Grace stood up suddenly, pacing the room. No, she said to herself. They don't deserve my help. They destroyed my life. They never pitied me. She sat back on the edge of her bed, her eyes burning with tears she had tried to hold back. I begged her not to sell me. She called me useless. She said I was like my mother. Her voice broke. She shook her head, biting her lip to stop the sob from escaping. Then that soft voice came again inside her heart, gentle, unshakable. You have a new life now. You found love. You found peace. Don't let hatred rule you again. Grace pressed her hand against her chest, trembling. But they deserve pain, she whispered through her tears. They deserve everything they're getting. She wiped her face quickly, stood up again, and faced the mirror. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the powerful lawyer the world saw. It was still that frightened girl who once begged for mercy in a dirty room. And for the first time in years, Grace felt weak. She sat back down slowly, her voice almost a whisper. God, what do you want me to do? To help them? To forgive them? After everything? Tears rolled down her cheeks, one after another. I can't, she said softly. I just can't. But somewhere deep inside her heart, a small, quiet voice still whispered, you can. Grace shook her head again, covering her face with her hands. They deserve pain, she said one last time, but even she didn't believe her own words anymore. Days passed, but peace refused to return to Grace's heart. Every time she looked at her reflection, she saw confusion written on her face. She worked longer hours at the office, trying to bury herself in files, yet her mind was never truly there. On the third day, Mrs. Benson came again. She looked thinner, weaker, and older. Her clothes were rough, her eyes swollen from endless crying. She stood at the front desk, clutching her handbag tightly, her voice trembling as she spoke to the secretary. Please, tell her it's me. I just want 5 minutes. 5 minutes to beg her again. The secretary went into Grace's office and returned moments later, shaking her head. I'm sorry, Ma. Madam Grace said she's busy and cannot see you. Mrs. Benson's face fell. Please help me. My daughter's life is on the line. I can't go back like this. The secretary looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Ma. Those were her instructions. Mrs. Benson stood there for a few seconds, breathing heavily as tears filled her eyes. Then, slowly, she turned and walked away. Outside, she sat on a low block by the roadside and buried her face in her palms. People passed by, but she didn't care anymore. Her voice came out in a whisper, God, even this woman they said helps everyone. Even she has rejected me. Where will I go now? That evening, Grace was sitting in the living room of her mansion, lost in thought. Her husband, Mike, walked in and immediately noticed her silence. She was staring at nothing, her hands pressed together tightly. He sat beside her. You've been quiet since morning. What's wrong? Grace looked up at him slowly, her eyes tired. Mike, something happened. He leaned closer. Talk to me. She took a deep breath and began to tell him everything from the day Mrs. Benson came to her office, to how she couldn't control her anger, to how she had refused to see her again. As she spoke, her voice trembled between pain and resentment. When she finished, Mike sighed deeply and took her hand. "Grace," he said softly, "you are not them." Grace looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you are not like your stepmother and her daughter," he said gently. "They chose wickedness, but you chose mercy. Don't let their actions turn you into what you once hated. You're better than that." Grace shook her head, her voice breaking. "But Mike, they sold me like an object. They traded my life for money. Do you know how that feels?" Mike nodded slowly. "I know, my love. But maybe God planned it that way. If they hadn't sold you, we might never have met. You might not have become who you are today." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "So, you think what they did was right?" "No," Mike said firmly. "I'm saying God used their wickedness to create your destiny. You were meant to rise from pain. Look at your life now. You have peace, success, and love. Don't let bitterness destroy that." Grace lowered her eyes, silent. Mike reached out and lifted her chin gently. "You said they sold you like an object, but look at you now. The woman they threw away is now their only hope. That's not a mistake. It's divine purpose." Tears filled Grace's eyes again. "I don't know if I can forgive them, Mike." "You don't have to forgive right away," he said softly. "But you must help. Show them that you are different. Show them that what they tried to destroy has become stronger, kinder, and greater." Grace leaned back on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. "They don't deserve it," she whispered. Mike smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But grace isn't about what people deserve. It's about what's right. And your name is Grace for a reason." His words struck her heart deeply. She sat there for a long moment, silent, before finally whispering, "They sold me, but maybe God was buying my freedom." Mike squeezed her hand gently. "That's the truth. And now he's giving you the chance to prove that light is stronger than darkness." Grace looked at him, tears in her eyes, and nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll help them." Mike smiled, brushing away her tears. "That's my Grace, the woman I fell in love with." The courtroom was packed that morning. Reporters filled the back seats, whispering among themselves. Lawyers, clerks, and curious onlookers had gathered to witness the case that had gripped the city, the state versus Lucy Benson. At exactly 10 o'clock, Grace Morgan walked in, dressed in a smart black suit. Her steps were calm but commanding. Everyone turned. There was something in the way she carried herself, quiet power mixed with grace. Mrs. Benson sat in the front row, her hands shaking. She hadn't stopped praying since she received Grace's call days earlier. When she heard that Grace herself would take the case, she fell to her knees in gratitude. "God has remembered me at last," she had cried. Now, as Grace stood before the judge, Mrs. Benson's eyes were fixed on her with hope. Lucy sat beside her mother, pale and nervous. The months in prison had drained her. But when she looked at Grace, something about the lawyer's face felt strangely familiar, though she couldn't place where she had seen it before. "Your Honor," Grace began, her voice steady, "my client, Miss Lucy Benson, is not guilty of this crime." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Grace opened her file and began to speak with authority. She questioned the driver, the manager, and the police officers who handled the case. Her words came out sharp and clear. "So," she said, turning to the driver, "you said you were with Miss Lucy when the robbers attacked?" "Yes, Ma," the driver replied nervously. "Did they harm either of you?" "No, Ma. They just took the money and left." Grace walked slowly toward him. "And yet you didn't report the robbery until after you both got back to the office?" The man hesitated. I was scared." Grace smiled faintly. "Scared enough to wait until the money was completely gone?" Whispers filled the courtroom. The driver lowered his head. Grace turned to the manager. "Sir, how much?" "Exactly was stolen." "Almost 1 billion naira," he replied. "And did you investigate your own staff? Anyone inside the company who might have known about the money before Lucy was assigned to take it?" The manager shifted uneasily. "Well, not really." Grace's tone grew firm. "So, you decided to destroy a young woman's life without even checking your own house?" The judge raised his hand. "Order." Grace bowed slightly. "My apologies, my lord." Then she turned back to the courtroom. It's clear, Your Honor, that Miss Lucy Benson was only a victim of circumstance. She was given money she knew nothing about, with a driver whose story is inconsistent. I believe this was an inside job, possibly orchestrated by someone higher in the company. The judge nodded thoughtfully. You may continue. Grace closed her file gently. That will be all, my lord. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the case. Then, with a single stroke of his gavel, he announced, "This court finds Miss Lucy Benson not guilty. She is hereby discharged and acquitted." A wave of relief swept through the room. Mrs. Benson fell on her knees, crying loudly. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." Lucy covered her mouth in disbelief, tears running down her cheeks. Grace only stood there quietly, watching them. When they stepped out of the courtroom, Mrs. Benson ran to her. She knelt right there on the pavement, holding Grace's hands tightly. "Great lawyer," she cried, "how can I ever repay you? What can I do to thank you for saving my daughter's life?" Grace looked down at her, her expression unreadable. "I don't need your money," she said calmly. "I only want you to understand that we are all different, and that evil leads nowhere." Mrs. Benson blinked in confusion. "What evil? What do you mean?" Grace smiled faintly, her voice calm but piercing. "The evil you committed against your stepdaughter years ago." Mrs. Benson's eyes widened. "What? Who told you about her? I hope the person also told you how wicked she and her mother were. Did the person tell you that she was a witch?" "Yes," Lucy added quickly, her tone defensive. "Lawyer, my mother is right. People conspired against us. We loved her, but she was a witch." Grace's lips curved into a sad smile. She wiped her palm slowly across her face and said quietly, "No one told me about Grace." They both looked at her, puzzled. Grace took a deep breath. "Because the lawyer standing in front of you is Grace, the same girl you sold like an object years ago." Mrs. Benson screamed. "What?" Lucy's mouth fell open. "No, it's not possible." "Yes," Grace said firmly, her eyes glistening. "I'm the one you called a witch. The one you threw away for money. The one you said was worthless." Mrs. Benson fell on her knees again, crying uncontrollably. "Oh God. Grace, my daughter, forgive me." Lucy joined her, trembling. "We didn't know what we were doing. Please forgive us." Grace stood silently for a moment, watching them. Her heart ached, but she didn't move. Then she turned to leave. They grabbed her legs, still kneeling. "Please, Grace. Don't go. Forgive us." She looked down at them, her eyes full of both pain and peace. "I already have," she said softly. "I didn't help you because you deserved it. I helped you because God taught me mercy." They cried louder, holding her feet. Grace gently freed herself and said, "If you ever need my help again, call me. But don't ask for too much. I've forgiven you, but don't expect me to forget." Then she walked away quietly, her head held high. The same girl who was once sold for money had now saved the very people who betrayed her not with hate, but with grace. Days passed after the court victory, but Mrs. Benson couldn't stop replaying what happened in her mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Grace's face, the calmness, the pain, and the power in her voice when she said, "I am Grace, the one you sold like an object." Sleep became a stranger. She would sit up at night, staring at the wall, whispering to herself, "So she was alive, and I called her a witch. I sold my own child." Lucy, too, could not rest. The prison walls might have released her body, but her heart was still locked behind guilt. She couldn't forget the look on Grace's face when she revealed the truth. "Mother," she said one morning, "we must go and see her again. We need to beg properly." Mrs. Benson nodded weakly. "We will, my daughter. I can't live with this weight. That girl, no, that woman, she's better than I ever was." Meanwhile, Grace's name filled the city. Newspapers carried headlines like, "Young lawyer wins billion-naira case." TV stations wanted to interview her. But Grace didn't feel like celebrating. Her victory was not about fame, it was about something deeper. She sat in her office one afternoon, staring at the file that once carried Lucy's case. Mike walked in quietly and found her lost in thought again. "You're still thinking about them?" he asked softly. Grace nodded slowly. "They haunt me, Mike. I see her face every night. My stepmother kneeling, Lucy crying, and me standing there, unable to tell if I felt joy or pain. Mike sat beside her. Maybe that's how healing feels, confusing but peaceful at the same time. Grace sighed. When I saw her that first day, I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to feel what I felt when she sold me. But when she cried in court, I saw the same fear I once had. I couldn't do it, Mike. I couldn't hate her anymore. He held her hand gently. That's why you're different. You chose mercy when you could have chosen revenge. Grace looked at him, her voice soft. You know, the funny thing is, when I forgave her, it felt like I set myself free too. Mike smiled. That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't change the past, but it heals the heart. Grace leaned on his shoulder, her eyes closing briefly. Then maybe that's why God allowed all this, to teach me that real power is not in revenge, but in compassion. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Benson and Lucy arrived at Grace's office again, but this time, they came with humility, not pride. They waited for hours until Grace was done with a meeting. When she came out, she saw them standing quietly. They both knelt immediately. Please, Grace, Mrs. Benson said, her voice breaking. I don't even know how to look at you. You saved us after everything we did. I came to thank you, not to ask for anything, just to thank you. Grace helped her up gently. You don't have to kneel again. What's done is done. Mrs. Benson sobbed. I wronged you in ways words can't describe. I lied against you. I destroyed your childhood. I called you names. Yet you still saved my daughter. May God bless you beyond measure. Grace looked at her quietly. It's fine. I've moved on. I've learned that holding on to pain only makes it worse. Lucy stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sister Grace, I was a child, but I followed my mother's ways. I called you names. I mocked you. Please forgive me. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. You've both been forgiven already. Just live better lives now. Do good to others. That's all I ask. Mrs. Benson held her hands. Can I still call you my daughter? Grace smiled faintly. You can. But don't call me to remind me of the past. Call me only when you want to share peace. They nodded, crying softly. Grace hugged them briefly, and in that moment, something broke, the curse of bitterness that had tied all their lives together for years. That night, as Grace stood by her window watching the moonlight fall across the compound, she whispered softly, Father, it's over. Mike came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. What are you thinking about? She smiled faintly. About how God turned my pain into purpose. He kissed her forehead. And how he turned your tears into victory. Grace looked up at the night sky, her heart finally light. Yes, and maybe that's what grace really means, turning wounds into wisdom and forgiveness into strength. Months rolled by quietly after the court case. The noise, the headlines, and the whispers all faded, but what remained were the lessons each heart carried. For Mrs. Benson, every new sunrise was a reminder of mercy undeserved. For Lucy, it was a reminder of a second chance. And for Grace, it was the beginning of true peace. One morning, as Grace prepared for work, her phone rang. It was Mike, calling from his office. Good news, he said warmly. There's an opening in one of our partner firms. They need someone in the accounts department. Do you think Lucy might be interested? Grace paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. Yes, she deserves a fresh start. That evening, she called Lucy. The young woman's voice trembled with gratitude. Sister Grace, you mean it? You'll help me find a job. Yes, Grace replied softly. But only if you promise to do it right this time, with honesty and humility. I promise, Lucy said quickly. I won't fail you. Grace smiled. Then, your new beginning starts tomorrow. A few days later, Lucy began work at her new office. She worked with quiet determination, avoiding shortcuts and gossip. Her humility surprised everyone. Her colleagues called her the gentle accountant. Each time she received her salary, she sent part of it to her mother in the village. Mrs. Benson, meanwhile, had changed completely. She no longer bragged or cursed people in the market. Instead, she became known for kindness. She helped widows sweep their stalls, prayed with strangers, and spoke softly where she once shouted. When people asked about her transformation, she would sigh deeply and say, "I once called an angel a witch, and I almost lost everything. Now I know that wickedness is a seed that always grows back to haunt the one who planted it." One weekend, Mrs. Benson and Lucy visited Grace and Mike at their mansion. They came not in pride, but in peace. Grace welcomed them with a smile, the same way Mr. Morgan once welcomed her when she arrived frightened and broken. Over lunch, Mrs. Benson said quietly, "Grace, I don't think I will ever stop thanking you." Grace smiled. "If you really want to thank me, then keep living right. That's enough." Lucy nodded tearfully. "We will, Sister Grace. You gave us life again." Grace looked at both of them gently. "God did. He only used me." Mike reached across the table and held Grace's hand. "She's right. None of this happened by chance. Sometimes, pain is the road God uses to bring light into the world." That evening, when everyone had gone, Grace stood by the balcony as the sunset painted the sky. The golden light fell across her face, soft and warm. She whispered to herself, "I was once thrown away like dirt, but God turned me into a vessel of healing." Mike joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And that's why you'll always be my miracle." Grace smiled. "No, Mike. We are each other's miracle. You taught me that love is stronger than hate." They stood there in silence, watching the last light fade into the evening sky. Far away, in the small village, Mrs. Benson knelt by her bedside that same night and prayed, "God, thank you for saving my daughter and for giving back the child I once lost." Grace's story spread quietly through the town, not as gossip, but as a lesson. A girl once sold like an object had risen to forgive the very ones who betrayed her. And in the end, it wasn't revenge that won. It was grace, the same grace that bears her name.